Last week I talked about Lake Mungo, a film that is very delicate in terms of narrative and features very little, if any, jump scares at all. Where Lake Mungo relies on subtlety to scare its audience, this movie that we're covering this week is probably the closest we'll get to a direct opposition to that. Before we really get into it, I'd like to quickly let you know that this video is going to contain major spoilers for Wreck. We are going to be talking about pretty much every aspect of the plot of this movie, so if you have any interest in watching it, I'd recommend stopping this video and coming back to it after you've seen the movie. If you're not planning on doing that, then don't worry, because like I said, we're going into all the details here, so you're not going to leave this video not knowing anything.
Momento. ¿Por dónde tengo el plano?
Por aquí.
Aquí. No se me ve esta mano, ¿no?
No.
Va.
¡Corre! ¡La llave del ático tiene que estar ahí!
Wreck is loud and it isn't afraid to get right in your face, acting more as that conventional horror experience that will repeatedly throw scares at you, and yet despite how overdone that can become over time if done too frequently, due to the effectiveness of what this film offers in terms of jump scares, I'd say that doesn't really get tiresome at all here. To give a brief introduction, Wreck is a Spanish horror film co-directed by, and I apologise if I pronounce it wrong here, Jaume Balaguero and Paco Plaza. Now if I got those wrong, blame Google Translate. The movie released to major success across the board and is highly considered by most that have seen it to be one of the best examples of true found footage horror. So much so that it spawned 3 follow-up sequels and an American remake, because apparently appreciating a good found footage foreign film is far too complicated for the Americans. Now I won't lie to you, the sequels are fine, nothing overly special. I'd probably say that the second one is best in terms of trying to keep to the tone that the original has. The third film is goofy, but I still have my fun with it, I still think it's a good time. And the fourth one would probably be the worst if not for the American remake, and yes, I'm using that as the compliment for the fourth one. The existence of sequels is actually a pretty weird one as well, because the directors had stated that they had no interest in doing them at all, and it's likely the financial success that Wreck saw that made them change their minds. And these two were both incredibly in sync with each other when it came to decision making, so much so that they had this weird pact, stating that if one of them pitched an idea that the other didn't like, it would be scrapped without any justification. Now, Wreck is an incredibly honest movie, and that there's no artificial filling to what you're seeing. Past the fact that this is a fictional movie, and the events of the movie are fictional, everything you're seeing within the film in terms of the set is completely real. That sounds confusing, and I'm really overcomplicating the fact that they just used a real apartment building instead of building a set. And to add a little bit more out of film information, this apartment building in Barcelona would go on to be vandalised by people who are likely too stupid to tell the difference between fact and fiction. On top of that, the entire film was filmed chronologically and none of the actors received the script in full. So many of them didn't even know of their character's fate until the day of filming rolled around. This creates this insanely stressful film, as with that knowledge you realise that any visible nervousness or stressful actions from the actors were likely a result of them feeling that. Now this creates an ideal setting for the audience to sit and watch, because it's obvious that it's going to feel more real to us if the characters are just as paranoid as we are. What also helps establish this realism is that Wreck finds its value much like other found footage films in unknown faces, at least for most of the characters. For one of them, they did something pretty interesting. They also looked for actors that would work well with improvisation, and I'm not going to say much on that right now, but you can probably imagine what the directors did to the actors with the information that I've given you. Manuela Velasco plays our central character Angela, and if she looks at home in this role, that's because in real life, Velasco really was a TV presenter in Spain. In the movie, she's part of a TV crew making a show titled While You're Sleeping, and in this episode currently being made, they're covering the night shift in one of Barcelona's local fire stations. Originally, the crew was supposed to be shadowing police officers. However, with firemen being more respected and accepted by the public, it was inevitable that they were swapped out. All through the recording of the show, Angela finds herself bored, lamenting as such to the cameraman, realising that she's not actually going to be in for the action-packed night she was hoping for. At some stage, she and the fire department get engaged in a riveting game of basketball, and it's here that the firehouse gets the call that's going to change Angela's night for better or for worse. I'll let you decide. Angela and her cameraman, who is called Pablo by the way, accompany two of the firefighters, Alex and Manu, to the apartment building the call originated from. Through the ride, we see the visible excitement on Angela's face, knowing that she's going to have something entertaining for her show, However, as they arrive, little by little, every sense of excitement starts to fade, one little moment after another. They approach the apartment and the police are already waiting, and upon arrival we hear Angela say a very eerie line that in retrospect encapsulates everything that's about to occur to them throughout the remainder of this horrific movie. They get inside and we find that the residents are all camped out in the main lobby. We're given a very brief introduction to a few of them, and after a small scuffle and a bit of unease, our story heads upstairs to follow on through this mysterious call. The firemen breach the door and enter, finding the resident in a very unnatural state. She seems distressed, and yet as they approach, her distress quickly turns to aggression and she attacks. She bites one of the police officers on the neck, and while the other restrains her, the rest of the people that had entered retreat to the lobby with the injured police officer. One thing that I love about this opening scare is the escalation of the scene. This woman starts out looking frightened and confused. The moment she turns that on its head is completely spontaneous and adds to the suddenness of it all. On top of that, the scuffle that follows it feels genuinely panicked, almost as if the actors had no idea what to do with this. They had no stage direction or anything like that. They all feel genuinely flustered, and it helps narrow in on that feeling of terror that the film is trying to emulate. The injured officer is carried back downstairs and they find all the building's current residents in the lobby. One thing that immediately alarms them, however, is when they try to leave, they see that the police and military have arrived. They've sealed the building, trapping them inside, at this stage leaving them with next to nothing to go on. This is where unease begins to settle in. We are trapped here with these characters as tension slowly starts to rise. Panic begins to heighten. Even the police officer, a figure that we traditionally look on with a lot of authority, looks lost in this knowledge that something going on here is horribly wrong. He's as terrified as these civilians, and yes, fair enough, he's hiding it a little better, albeit a few manic outbursts, but he is not going to be the hero that saves the day here, and that's made blatantly apparent in this scene. And this scene is also where we get our first major scare of the movie.
Y que no le dejan acercarse al edificio y le traía antibióticos a la niña.
In a really well done few moments, a body hits the floor hard. The police officer who'd stayed with the woman had been thrown from the upper floor, now left in a critical state. I'm surprised he's not dead here, but one of the characters does drop a line hinting at the fact that he's still alive, which, fair enough, good on him for surviving that, I guess. What I love about this scare is that every reaction is genuine. None of the actors were told that this was actually going to happen. This is just as big a scare for them as it is for us. Really helps hammer home that feeling of genuine horror when you realise that the actors are just as scared as we are. From there, when we go back upstairs, we see that the old woman has killed another resident, this one being labelled as a Colombian lady. And when we see her this time, she seems much more far gone than what she was before, appearing downright feral towards everyone in the room, and she charges, leaving no choice but to be shot dead. And through this, somehow tension's only rising further the entire time. We can see that Angela now looks downright unwell and a nervous wreck about this entire thing. And that's with good reason too. I can't say it would be any different. The characters reveal themselves as yo-yos as they go downstairs once again. Here, Angela and Pablo begin to interview the residents one by one. This is a fun little scene. We get a little more of some of these background characters, which gives the group as a whole, as limited as their time is, some much needed depth. However, there's a clear shift in tone when Angela begins to interview a young girl. Instantly, she looks unwell, and she herself confirms this, and everyone who's seen a movie like this and has half a brain knows this is only going one way. Her mother claims that Jennifer has tonsillitis, and her dog is currently also at the vet because it's sick too. And it's at this point where we are presented with a potential solution, or at least the bearer of some sort, as a scientist comes into the story. That's right, a man in a hazmat suit appears, and those are never bad news in movies. He attempts to treat the injured until they too become incredibly aggressive. They're quickly locked away because the virus takes its hold and they start attacking, biting one of the residents. As they're shut away in the workshop, tensions and panic are at an all-time high, and when backed into a corner with no way out, the hazmat suit proceeds to explain that they're infected with a virus similar to rabies. And this just in, people, horror fans, you would have known this was coming. The virus can be traced back to a dog that was addressed at this apartment building. Who would have thought it? I didn't. So yes, if you'll recall, literally 30 seconds ago, I told you that Jennifer had a dog. That girl that is currently sick. Angela realises this, and the moment everything is realised by the characters is so damn good. It's acknowledged by this collective silence as the camera is slowly turned to focus on Mary and her daughter. As they try to separate them, there's this horrific moment that showcases just how abrupt the change can be. Jennifer looks entirely fine and leans in to her mother, and it looks as though she's just trying to hide her face. But then the mother suddenly screams, Jennifer pulls back, and the mother has a massive chunk of flesh missing. Yeah, it's fucking chaotic. And before they can even apprehend Jennifer, she runs upstairs, like a child who's just done something they shouldn't have. Oh wait. Sergio handcuffs Mari to the railing, with the information they have being enough to know that she's now infected. Now with another major problem on their hands, Manu and Sergio run off in search of Jennifer, with Angela sending Pablo with them to capture footage. Just a real quick unrelated side note, because I just wanted to say, I absolutely love the pure look of dissatisfaction whenever Sergio sees Pablo. It is fantastic. You know, the complete look of irritation. It makes me smile every time. They find Jennifer in what is probably the best part of this movie. This little girl suddenly appears in the doorway, unresponsive. Her eyes are messed up as she ignores any attempt at conversation. Sergio moves to try and inject Jennifer with what I assume is some sort of antibody that acts against the virus. But the stupid idiot decides that he wants to lower his guard for a split second, and Jennifer attacks. And unfortunately, that is all that police officer wrote. Pablo and Manu try to flee, but the old woman returns revealing that she is not dead. Manu, like the absolute badass he is, just clobbers her over the fucking skull, killing her for sure this time, I think. Manu is the unlikely hero of this movie. I absolutely love this guy. He just looks like such a cool dude, and I hope that nothing bad happens to him. Both of them rush downstairs as pandemonium ensues because the infected that were locked in the textile warehouse have broken out. This begins what I see as the final act. Over the course of a very short time, the remaining residents of the building are torn down and infected. This eventually leaves us with only 3 people. We have cameraman Pablo, we have final girl Angela, and we also have the bad man that is Manu. Manu stands guard as Pablo and Angela search the apartment in hopes of finding a key that would lead them out of the building through a drain in the basement. Sadly, this is where I had my heart broken. We leave the apartment and Manu is gone. Now there is this really cool shot where the camera pans down the gap in the stairs and we see Manu reveal himself as infected, and honestly it breaks my heart just to think about it. We're approaching the end now, and admittedly this is where Rec does kind of try to push itself a little. It works, it definitely works, but there is no denying that it adds a twist into here that is definitely not any old Contagion. They head to the top floor apartment owned by a man from Madrid who's alluded to earlier on in the film during a roll call scene. Pablo and Angela take refuge in the apartment, blocking the doors. They begin to explore, finding straight away that something just isn't right here. Because, you know, that wasn't obvious enough already. They needed further confirmation of that. They discover a tape player, and lucky for them, it has one still inside. Unluckily for them, it's not got their favourite song, instead got a confession from the man from Madrid. He reveals that he was tasked with isolating an enzyme that was being carried by a Portuguese girl whose name we find from newspaper cutouts on the wall is Tristana. Or Tristina. Or Tristana. I really don't know. I don't speak Spanish. However, as the man had tried to treat her, the enzyme mutated and became contagious. Unwilling to let it spread, the man just left, hoping that Tristina would starve to death. We get this very predictable jump scare, and this is the one time I'm going to say this about Rec. Pablo puts the camera up through the loft entrance, panning it around very slowly, and if you'll believe me, there's a little kid in this attic that suddenly screams at the camera when it turns right around. My theory here is that this kid was locked in the attic without his... There was no Fortnite. Maybe his DS died or something, I don't know, but point is, he's kind of cuckoo. He's kind of crazy. He hits the camera and it breaks the light, which means for the closing 5 minutes of this movie, we're using night vision, baby, which adds this very limited layer of visibility to the remainder of the movie. Tristina finally appears, now free from whatever confine she was trapped in before. Because I'm honestly not entirely sure. Anytime I watch this movie, I'm obviously just not paying enough attention. She just sort of appears. I'm guessing she was in the attic as well. I don't know. I don't know, man. Then something happens. I wasn't warning you, but I said the closing part of this movie was pretty much completely dark. I think Pablo kicks something in the dark and then Tristina kills him as a result of that. The camera then hits the floor and there's this harrowing 10-ish seconds where we can see a small amount of the floor and we can hear Angela becoming more and more panicked, somehow transcending what she was moments before. She stumbles into view, kicking the camera, and we're greeted with the movie's ending. Angela lies on the floor staring at the camera looking completely broken. Her eyes are wide and frantic. We're looking at a woman who knows she's doomed. A woman who at the start of the night was crying out for something more exciting and getting that, but at the expense of everything. So in one last final attempt to save herself, we watch Angela attempt to drag herself to safety. However, there's a split second where she freezes, and we're not quite aware of what causes this until we realise that something clearly grabbed her. As the final shot of the movie shows Angela dragged into the darkness, leaving the movie on a literally incredibly dark note. Wreck is terrifying, and I'd argue with anybody that it is probably one of the scariest movies of all time. And this wouldn't nearly be the case if the found footage aspect of this movie didn't feel so authentic. Authenticity is a surefire way to make your found footage film a success, and this film has it in spades. A movie made with this technique that doesn't feel like it could be set in reality isn't going to trigger that same fight or flight response as one that does feel set in reality. The ending though, that's a subject of debate for me, honestly. There's a conversation to be had there. Bearing in mind this wasn't the only planned conclusion that the directors had for this thing. There was one where Angela escaped the apartment only to be attacked and killed by the elderly woman, and another where she escapes and stumbles through the darkness, making her way through the residents who stand in this almost trance-like state. However, one of them wakes up and does kill her. Now that concept does actually get reused. That one's used in Rec 3, so if you're interested in seeing that play out, you can watch it there. But I'm glad it wasn't used here because of the three that I've told you. For me, that's definitely the weakest one. Now for a spoiler for future movies, Angela didn't die. She reappears in the sequel, which acts as a direct sequel to the first movie. She also features in the fourth film as the protagonist after she's not in the third one at all. And the fourth film actually completely ditches found footage, so it's dead to me. In all seriousness, I'm not going to write off never revisiting these films and talking about the sequels in the future. If you're interested in watching me cover them, then feel free to let me know. In the end, I do believe the conclusion they went with was the best option. I think the second option feels more full circle, but lacks that killer final note that we get with this outcome. This entire final act is gorgeous. We can barely see anything, and that's almost the point. We've never felt more in touch with these characters. We feel just as claustrophobic as they do. That sinking feeling of not knowing what hides just out of view plays a monumental part in that dread that we feel. And again, our emotions are shared with the actors. The final moments were actually filmed in complete darkness using an infrared camera. Manuela truly had no idea what was going on. She is literally terrified in this moment, and it only helps elevate this scene as well as the movie that much higher. The film has no redeeming quality, and I mean that as the highest compliment possible. Allow me to explain what I mean real quick. Rec is a movie that features a constant downward trajectory in its events. There's never a moment where it feels as though these characters stand a chance, never a moment where a happy ending is alluded to. It adds to the finality of everything, and in the end creates this constantly empty feeling that things just can't possibly be alright ever again. You feel for these characters because they try to remain hopeful even in their panic, and you connect with them because for this entire movie you're on their level. You're with them, stuck in this apartment building as they fight for their lives. Rec felt so authentic and well orchestrated that to me it's as though the viewer is the final survivor, cursed with moving on after everything they've just witnessed in this chaotic night. And that, as well as the quality and the care taken with the horror, is why Rec is 100% in my opinion the most terrifying horror movie ever made. Hello, thank you so much for watching. Like last week, this video is a lot different from the usual Media 13 content you've been seeing, so if you did enjoy it, then a like would be greatly appreciated. It lets me know that you want to see more like this. And if you really enjoyed this and don't want to miss out on the likes of the future content that I've got planned, including next week's finale to the found footage coverage, then you can subscribe. It's completely free, and I'll give you a receipt so you can return that at any point if you want. Like last time, since it's October, I feel like I should ask a horror-themed question. So as well as letting me know if you've seen Rec or not, I'd also like to know this. What's your go-to pick for the scariest movie ever made? That being said, my name has been Jordan. Once more, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next week, where we will be looking at the conclusion of the found footage coverage, which is